And then there was the theory that all Martians were alike sexually, being either bisexual or having no sex at all, as we understand sex, and that possibly they reproduced by parthenogenesis, or some means we couldn't even guess at. For all we knew, they grew on trees like coconuts and dropped off when they were ripe, already adult and intelligent, ready to face their world, or to face and sneer at ours. In that case, the smallest among them could have been babies, as it were, just off the tree, but fully as hateful as the bigger and older ones. If the smallest among them weren't infants, then we never saw a Martian infant. We never learned what they ate or drank, or even whether they did eat or drink. They couldn't have eaten Earth food, of course. They couldn't even pick it up or handle it, for the same reason that we couldn't handle them. Most people thought that since their quimming seemed to be an instantaneous process, a Martian would simply quim to Mars and back again any time he felt the need for food or drink, or for sleep, if Martians slept, since no one had ever seen a Martian sleeping on Earth. We knew amazingly little about them. We didn't know for sure that they were really here in person. Many people, and especially scientists, insisted that a life form that is non-corporeal, without solidity, cannot possibly exist, and that therefore what we saw weren't the Martians themselves, but projections of them, that the Martians had bodies as solid as ours, and left their bodies back on Mars, possibly in a trance state, that quimming was simply the ability to project an astral body that was visible but not corporeal. If true, that theory explained a lot, but that there was one thing it didn't explain, even its most ardent proponents had to admit. How could a non-corporeal projection talk? Sound is the physical movement or vibration of air or other molecules, so how could a mere projection that wasn't really there create a sound? And they certainly created sounds. Actual sounds, not just in the mind of the listener. The fact that the sounds they made could be recorded on wax or tape was proof of that. They could really talk, and they could also, but seldom did, knock on doors. The Martian who knocked on Luke Devereaux's door on what came to be called coming night had been an exception in that particular respect. Most of them had quimmed their way without knocking right into living rooms, bedrooms, television stations, nightclubs, theaters, taverns. There must have been some wonderful scenes in taverns that night, barracks, igloos, jails, everywhere. They also showed clearly on photographs, as Luke Devereaux would have found out had he ever bothered to have that roll of film developed. Whether they were there or not, they were opaque to light, but not to radar, and scientists tore their hair over that. They all insisted that they had no names or even numbers, and that names were ridiculous and unnecessary. None of them ever addressed a human being by name. In the United States, they called every man Mac and every woman Toots. Elsewhere, they used local equivalents. In one field at least, they showed tremendous aptitude: linguistics. Luke's Martian hadn't been bragging when he said he could learn a new language in an hour or so. The Martians who appeared among various primitive peoples whose tongues had never been broadcast by radio arrived without knowing a word of the language, but they were speaking it adequately within an hour, fluently within a few hours. And whatever language they spoke it idiomatically, even slangily, with none of the stiffness and awkwardness with which human beings speak a new language which they have recently acquired. Many words in their vocabulary were obviously not learned from radio broadcasts, but that isn't difficult to account for. Within seconds of their arrival, they, or many of them, had plenty of opportunity to pick up a liberal education in profanity. The Martian, for example, who had broken up Romeo and Juliet on television with his vulgar comment on Romeo's balcony scene speech, was no doubt one who had first quimmed into, say, a tavern, but had sought greener pastures within a matter of seconds, when he had found too many others of his kind had quimmed into the same place. Mentally, the Martians were even more alike than they were physically, although again there was minor variation. Some of them were even worse than others. But one and all, they were abusive, aggravating,